The night was still, save for the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Jake sat on his porch, sipping a beer, enjoying the rare moment of peace. It had been a long day, and the last thing he needed was another headache courtesy of the neighborhood tyrant, Karen. She had been on a warpath lately, fixated on his shed as if it were a personal insult to her pristine HOA-mandated vision of suburbia. He had ignored her threats, figuring she'd eventually find a new target. Then came the crash. A loud, metallic clang shattered the quiet, followed by a sharp yelp. Jake froze mid-sip. It was coming from his backyard. His first thought was raccoons, maybe a stray dog, but the unmistakable sound of a human voice, a muffled curse, sent his adrenaline spiking. He set his drink down, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped cautiously toward the noise. The smell hit him first. A thick, noxious wave of sulfur and burnt rubber slammed into his nostrils, making his eyes water. He gagged, instinctively pulling his shirt over his nose. Then he heard it, violent coughing, gagging, and furious sputtering. Someone was inside his shed. Jake flicked on the flashlight and directed it at the door. It had been forced open, the lock hanging uselessly to the side. He clenched his jaw. Someone had broken in. Slowly he crept forward, angling the light into the dark interior. That's when he saw her. Karen. The self-proclaimed queen of the homeowners association stood in the middle of the shed, drenched in thick, oily skunk spray. Her once perfectly coiffed blonde bob was streaked with grime, her expensive blouse ruined, and her face twisted in an expression of pure horror and disgust. Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe the foul-smelling liquid from her skin, but all she managed to do was smear it further. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, ragged gasps, eyes wide with fury. "You," she started, but a violent retch cut her off. She bent over, gripping her knees as another wave of gagging racked her body. Jake leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Let me guess," he said, voice even. "You let yourself in?" Karen shot up, eyes blazing with defiance, despite her obvious distress. This is illegal. This shed is a violation of HOA code. I was doing a *** community service ***, getting rid of it before it attracted pests." Jake let out a slow, amused breath. "Looks like the pests were already here." Karen pointed a trembling, manicured finger at him. "You think this is funny? You," she coughed again, doubling over as another fresh wave of skunk stench engulfed her. Her body shuddered, and for a second it looked like she might actually throw up. Jake tilted his head. "I do actually." She stumbled forward, making a beeline for him, but the skunks weren't done with her yet. From the shadows of the shed, a small black and white creature emerged, tail raised high. A second spray, this time directly at Karen's legs. The scream that followed was something out of a horror movie. She tripped, landed hard on her side, and scrambled away on all fours, hands slipping against the floor. Jake simply watched. Eventually she made it outside, stumbling onto the grass, dry heaving as the fresh night air did little to rid her of the overwhelming stink. She turned to him, eyes burning with a mix of rage and humiliation. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Jake raised an eyebrow. "I don't think I was the one who broke into someone else's property tonight." For a moment, her expression flickered, just a brief second of realization that she was, in fact, in the wrong. But she recovered quickly, straightening up despite her wretched state. "The HOA will hear about this," she snapped. "You think you can just keep this disgusting thing on your property? I have authority, Jake. You're going to be fined, written up, and forced to remove it." Jake pulled his phone from his pocket. "Cool. I'll send them the security footage of you breaking in." The color drained from her face. For the first time that night she hesitated. Her fingers twitched at her sides as if reaching for some excuse, some loophole to twist the situation in her favor. But there was none. He had her. "You wouldn't," she whispered, a pathetic edge creeping into her voice. Jake held up the phone, the screen glowing in the dark. "Already recorded. Might even upload it if you keep pushing me." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at him, then at her own ruined clothes, her sticky hands, the mess she'd made of herself. The war wasn't over. He could see it in her eyes. But tonight? Tonight she'd lost. Without another word, she turned on her heel and staggered toward the street, her breath still coming in short, labored gasps. The stench followed her like a ghost, a thick, putrid trail lingering in the air long after she disappeared into the night. Jake exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as the tension in his body finally eased. He stepped into the shed and carefully knelt beside the skunks, murmuring softly to them as they chattered and twitched their tails. "Good work, little guys," he said with a grin. He closed the shed, locking it properly this time, and turned back toward his house. The night was peaceful again, but something told him Karen wouldn't let this go. No, she'd be back. And next time, Jake would be ready. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp grass and freshly brewed coffee as Jake stepped onto his porch. He stretched, feeling the satisfying pop of his shoulders, and took a deep breath. It should have been a good morning. But something felt off. A familiar sense of unease crawled up his spine, an instinct honed after months of dealing with Karen's antics. His eyes flicked toward the mailbox. A bright yellow envelope stuck out from the usual pile of bills and junk mail. HOA issued, stamped with bold lettering that screamed violation notice. Jake exhaled sharply, already feeling the irritation simmer in his chest. He tore the envelope open and scanned the letter. Notice of non-compliance * unauthorized structure in violation of HOA regulations. Failure to remove the structure within 7 days will result in escalating fines and legal action. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't just about the shed anymore. This was Karen's retaliation. The universe had served her a direct, skunk-sprayed dose of karma, but she wasn't one to accept defeat gracefully. No, Karen fought dirty. And now, she was using her last shred of authority to try and strong-arm him into submission. Jake ran a hand through his hair, forcing himself to think logically. The shed wasn't illegal. He had built it well within property guidelines. The only thing that made it unauthorized was Karen's personal vendetta. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, already expecting the worst. HOA community chat, new message from Karen M. With a sigh, he opened the app. Karen had posted a public message addressed to the entire neighborhood. *, as HOA president, it is my duty to maintain the integrity of our beautiful community. Unfortunately, some residents refuse to comply with basic property standards. One such individual has not only constructed an illegal structure but has also endangered our neighborhood with a wildlife infestation. I urge all responsible homeowners to stand with the HOA in ensuring our community remains a safe and clean environment. Jake let out a dry, humorless laugh. She was spinning the narrative, making it sound like he was some reckless animal hoarder instead of someone rehabilitating skunks for an actual licensed program. The real kicker? Her post was filled with comments supporting her. Disgusting. Wild animals don't belong near our homes. I smelled something awful last night. Was that from his property? She's right. We moved here for peace, not a petting zoo. Jake's stomach twisted. He knew Karen had her loyalists, people who followed her simply because they feared crossing her. But seeing it in writing, seeing people turn against him so easily, stung more than he cared to admit. But he wasn't about to roll over. If Karen wanted to play dirty, then fine. He could play smarter. He spent the next few hours researching. He combed through HOA bylaws, zoning laws, anything that might protect his shed from her crusade. It wasn't long before he found something useful. A legal loophole that Karen, in her arrogance, had overlooked. According to state law, wildlife rehabilitation overrides HOA restrictions as long as the structure is compliant with local safety codes. And Jake's shed? Perfectly compliant. A slow smile crept onto his face. He wasn't just safe, he was untouchable. But he wasn't done yet. A few calls later, he had an appointment set up with a local wildlife officer, someone who could officially verify that his shelter was in accordance with legal standards. And as a final touch, he reached out to a few neighbors who weren't under Karen's thumb, ones who had quietly resented her power trips for years. The plan was forming. That night, just as he expected, Karen showed up. Jake had been sitting on his porch, waiting, when her car rolled to a stop in front of his driveway. Even in the dim light, he could see she had cleaned up, freshly done hair, pressed slacks, her usual mask of control firmly back in place. But she wasn't fooling anyone. He could still see the faint shadow of frustration in her posture, the rigid tension in the way she clutched a clipboard to her chest. She stepped out, smoothing her expression into mock concern. "Jake," she began, voice laced with exaggerated politeness. "I wanted to come speak with you directly." He set his beer down. "About what?" She held up the clipboard as if brandishing a weapon. "I've issued a final warning regarding your shed. You need to remove it or you'll start accumulating daily fines." Jake leaned back in his chair, arms resting lazily on the armrests. "You sure about that?" Her eyes flickered with a split second of hesitation. "Yes. The HOA has spoken." Jake tilted his head. "That's funny. Because I just spoke with the state wildlife office, and they confirmed my shed is completely legal." Karen's fingers tightened around the clipboard. That. And, he continued smoothly, they'll be stopping by this week for an official inspection. Just to make sure everything is up to code. Karen's lips parted slightly, caught between a rebuttal and sheer panic. She hadn't expected this. Jake smiled. Oh, and one more thing. He pulled out his phone, opened the HOA chat and started typing. Hello neighbors. Just wanted to clarify some misinformation going around. My shed is not illegal. It's actually part of a state-approved wildlife rehabilitation program. A state wildlife officer will be visiting soon to confirm. If anyone has concerns, I'm happy to chat. He pressed send. Karen's phone buzzed immediately, the notification lighting up her screen. She snatched it up, scanning the chat, watching in real time as the tone of the neighborhood shifted. Wait, so it's legal? If it's approved by the state, doesn't that mean the HOA can't do anything? Did Karen lie to us? Karen's face twisted into something ugly, something raw. She clenched her clipboard against her chest like a shield, lips pressed into a tight, white line. Jake leaned forward, voice low, deliberate. I think you just lost this one. Her jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked like she might argue, might grasp for some last shred of control. But she wasn't stupid. She knew a losing battle when she saw one. Without another word, she turned sharply on her heel, stalked back to her car and slammed the door shut. Jake watched her taillights vanish into the night, the ghost of a smirk still lingering on his lips. Karen had played her hand. Now it was his turn. Jake knew Karen wouldn't back down quietly. She had taken a hit, but a woman like her didn't accept defeat, she schemed. And sure enough, the next morning, the consequences of her desperation became clear. He was barely out of bed when his phone buzzed with an incoming call. A known number. He considered ignoring it, but something told him to pick up. Mr. Walker? A formal voice asked. Speaking. This is Officer Delgado with the local wildlife enforcement unit. I understand you have a rehabilitation structure on your property? Jake's grip on the phone tightened. There it was. I do, he said carefully. And I have an appointment with one of your officers this week for an official inspection. Pause. Then, yes, I see that. However, we received an anonymous complaint about your facility. The report claims it's unsafe, unsanitary, and possibly harboring dangerous animals. Jake let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. Karen. I can assure you, he said evenly, that complaint is bogus. My structure is up to code, and the Skunked house are part of a monitored rehabilitation effort. I have documentation to prove it. Delgado's voice was professional but not unsympathetic. That's good to hear. We take all complaints seriously, so I'll be stopping by today for a preliminary check. Just to make sure everything is in order. Jake forced a tight smile, despite the frustration coiling in his chest. Of course. I'll see you then. He hung up and exhaled sharply. Karen had moved fast. Too fast. She had to have filed the complaint the second she left his driveway. It was a low move even for her, going straight for the authorities in a last-ditch effort to sabotage him. But Jake had spent too much time preparing for this fight. He wasn't about to lose. By the time Officer Delgado arrived that afternoon, Jake had everything ready. The shed was spotless, the permits neatly displayed, and the skunks resting peacefully in their designated enclosures. Delgado was thorough, checking every detail, but it was clear from his expression that he wasn't finding anything remotely illegal. After nearly 30 minutes of inspection, he finally stepped back, nodding approvingly. Everything looks good here, Mr. Walker. The animals are well cared for, and your setup meets regulation standards. I'll be filing this as a false complaint. Relief surged through Jake, but he kept his face neutral. Appreciate that, officer. Delgado gave him a knowing look. This wouldn't happen to be some kind of neighborhood dispute, would it? Jake let out a dry chuckle. You could say that. Delgado sighed, tucking his clipboard under his arm. Figured as much. We get these kinds of complaints all the time, petty grievances disguised as concerns for the community. Waste of my time, really? He shook his head. If this happens again, you might want to consider filing harassment charges. Just a thought. Jake's eyebrows lifted slightly. Now that was an idea. As Delgado drove off, a plan began to take shape in Jake's mind. Karen had tried to weaponize the system against him, but the system had rules. And Jake was starting to realize he could use them too. He didn't have to wait long for his next move. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he spotted Karen outside, talking to a small group of neighbors. Even from a distance, Jake could see the frustration in her expression. The way she gestured animatedly, probably spinning some new lie about how dangerous his shed was. Perfect. He pulled out his phone, hit record and started walking. Karen's voice drifted into earshot as he approached. And I don't care what the inspection said. That man is bringing diseases into this neighborhood. What happens when those things start attacking people? Do we just wait for someone's child to get hurt? One of the neighbors, an older woman named Linda, frowned. But the officer said everything was legal. Karen scoffed. That doesn't mean it's right. We have a community standard to uphold. And frankly, I don't feel safe living next to a wild animal sanctuary. Jake chose that moment to step forward. Funny, he said, voice carrying just enough to make her stiffen. Because I don't feel safe living next to someone who files false police reports. Karen whipped around, eyes flashing. Excuse me? Jake held up his phone, the recording still going. You made a false complaint about my property. Wildlife enforcement confirmed everything is legal, which means your report was fraudulent. He smirked. You know, that's actually a punishable offense. Harassment, defamation, you name it. The color drained from Karen's face, but she recovered quickly, crossing her arms. I was concerned for public safety. That's not a crime. Jake tilted his head. No, but filing a knowingly false report is. And if this happens again, I'll be taking legal action. A tense silence settled over the group. The neighbors exchanged glances, clearly re-evaluating the situation. Linda cleared her throat. If Jake's shed is legal, then I don't see what the problem is. Another man nodded. Yeah, Karen, maybe it's time to let this go. Karen's hands curled into fists at her sides. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had expected outrage, had expected the neighborhood to turn on him, not the other way around. Jake took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. This isn't your HOA kingdom, Karen. You don't get to make the rules just because you don't like me. Her nostrils flared, but she had no comeback. Not this time. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed off, her shoulders stiff with barely contained fury. Jake watched her retreat, feeling the weight of victory settle in his chest. She had played her hand again. And once again she had lost. But something told him she wasn't finished yet. Jake had seen the look in Karen's eyes before, the glint of someone who refused to accept reality. He had backed her into a corner, stripped her of control and exposed her lies. But people like Karen didn't go down quietly. They came back meaner. So when he stepped outside the next morning and found his shed broken into, his gut reaction wasn't shock. It was fury. The lock had been ripped clean off, the door left hanging open. Inside, his carefully arranged supplies were scattered, bags of food slashed open, straw bedding tossed carelessly across the floor. Worst of all, the enclosure doors were wide open, and the skunks? Gone. A cold, burning rage settled in Jake's chest. He turned on his heel, storming back toward the house, already dialing the local wildlife office. This wasn't just a violation. This was a crime. Asterisk. Officer Delgado, the familiar voice answered. This is Jake Walker, he said, voice sharp. Someone broke into my shed last night and released the skunks. A beat of silence. Then Delgado's tone hardened. I'll be right there. While he waited, Jake scanned the area, searching for any sign of his missing animals. They wouldn't have gone far. Skunks weren't the type to sprint off into the wilderness. They were likely hiding nearby, scared and confused. Then he heard it. A scream. Not just any scream. Karen's scream. Asterisk. Jake turned toward the sound, barely suppressing the grim satisfaction curling in his gut. He jogged across the street, where a small crowd had gathered outside Karen's front yard. And there she was, asterisk, standing frozen on her perfectly manicured lawn, asterisk, her entire body rigid, eyes locked onto the three small black and white creatures huddled near her porch. Her porch. Jake stopped, taking in the scene. His skunks, asterisk, the very ones she had tried so desperately to get rid of, asterisk, had wandered straight into her yard. It was poetic. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, like she was struggling to process the cruel irony of the universe turning against her. What are they doing here? She shrieked, stepping back like the creatures might suddenly lunge at her. Jake crossed his arms. Looks like they found a new home. Karen spun toward him, face flushed with rage. Asterisk, get rid of them, asterisk. Oh, now you want my help? He mused, tilting his head. Funny, considering you went out of your way to make my job impossible. Her hands curled into fists. I don't know what you're talking about. Jake took a slow step forward, lowering his voice. Then why was my shed broken into last night? Karen's nostrils flared. How should I know? Because you're the only person desperate enough to pull something like this. The watching neighbors murmured amongst themselves. They had heard all the rumors, seen Karen's relentless campaign against Jake. And now, faced with irrefutable karma, doubt was creeping into their eyes. Before Karen could spit another excuse, Officer Delgado's car pulled up, sirens off but lights flashing. He stepped out, eyes immediately locking onto Jake. You called in a break-in? Jake gestured toward the shed. Lock was busted. Animals were let loose. Then, with a pointed look at Karen, he added, and now they've conveniently ended up on her property. Delgado's gaze flicked between them, sharp and assessing. Then he turned to Karen. Ma'am, do you have any knowledge of this? Karen's expression twisted. Of course not. I don't even go near his disgusting little animal hut. Delgado sighed, clearly tired of the nonsense. Right. Well, considering Mr. Walker's shed was legally approved, this incident is criminal trespassing and animal endangerment. His eyes darkened. Both of which are punishable offenses. Karen paled. You can't be serious. Very, Delgado said, unimpressed. Unless you have proof that someone else broke in? Karen's lips parted, but nothing came out. She had no proof because she was guilty. Jake let the silence stretch before leaning in slightly. Guess that makes this an open and shut case, huh? Karen's mouth snapped shut, her body trembling with suppressed rage. She had lost. Completely, asterisk. Delgado pulled out a notepad. I'll be filing an official report. If we find evidence linking you to this, you'll be facing charges. Jake didn't miss the way Karen's hands shook as she crossed her arms, her nails digging into her skin. And then, as if the universe had one last bit of punishment left for her, one of the skunks moved. It turned toward Karen, lifted its tail, and a spray of pure vengeance filled the air. Karen's scream tore through the neighborhood, high-pitched and absolutely panicked. She stumbled back, hands flying to her face as the foul stench enveloped her. The neighbors gasped, some covered their mouths. Others laughed outright. Jake. He just smiled. There was no coming back from this. Karen had spent months trying to ruin him, trying to control the neighborhood, trying to make herself the ultimate authority. And now she was the woman who got publicly skunked in broad daylight. Jake turned to Delgado, who was struggling not to smirk. I think we can consider that a natural consequence, Jake said lightly. Delgado exhaled, shaking his head with amusement. Yeah, let's go with that. As the neighbors whispered and laughed, Karen fled inside, her humiliation complete. Jake took one last look at the disaster she had brought upon herself, then clapped his hands together. Guess I better get my skunks home.